So, I've been watching flat Earth videos just to try to understand the point of view, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, we live in a three-dimensional universe. Up, down, left, right, forwards, backwards. And supposedly we live on a two-dimensional surface. Now, supposedly that there's a dome above us called the firmament with a bunch of stars that are kind of just based on there or affixed somehow. I don't know. I don't pay it much stock because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you break it down. And that the moon and sun are the same size inside the dome, or they're outside the dome. Yes, there's actually some flat earthers that actually tried saying that the sun was outside the dome, and so that's they've got no consensus on what they believe. Now, there's also another concept that the Earth has an infinite plane, and that there's a giant sheet of ice that has these little holes in it, which doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't exactly solve the issue, it kind of exacerbates it. Now, a lot of questions you might ask, a lot of questions that might be asked is, why hasn't someone gone to the edge and found either another one of these little ponds or found the dome? The main excuse you hear is because the Antarctic Treaty that the UN is enforcing. Last time I checked, the UN have a hard time agreeing on most things. And they must have an insanely high physical prowess to be able to set up that many ships and troops, because keeping people from a border has not been 100% successful. I mean, if you want an example of a militarized border that people actually get across from time to time, North and South Korea. That thing is mined. They've also got watchtowers where you've got soldiers carrying rifles, and still, from time to time, not too often, there are people who sneak across the border from North Korea to South Korea to escape. They're willing to take on heavy fire, risk landmines, just for a chance of freedom. And in the grand scheme, that border is a lot smaller than Antarctica. So the amount of military presence and what they would have to do is beyond what is possible just to keep people from going across. At some point, there would have been someone. And that being the case, What if in those other little ponds, there's inhabitants there? What's to keep them out? At a certain point, we would have. There would have been a case where someone would have tried to cross the Antarctic ice wall to our pond. Unless you're going to say that all the other ones are uninhabited by people, which I don't know why they wouldn't be. But I digress. It just tells you how how silly the concept is. I mean, a two-dimensional plane in a three-dimensional universe just does not make sense. And if you try to deny that we live in a three-dimensional universe, well, that's bizarre. That's just, there's no helping you. Now, they also don't believe in gravity and always demand proof. So, a lot of people think that that proves gravity, and anyone who debates that has no idea what they're talking about. Well, true, since there's plenty of things that we don't actually know what they are, but we do know that they do exist. I mean, take electromagnetism, which flat earthers will substitute for gravity, even though electromagnetism is bipolar, has a north and a south pole, or positive and negative charge, and gravity doesn't seem to have that property. It pulls on everything equally. However, we don't entirely know how the field works. I mean, there's probably physicists who do know. I'm not the smartest person on the planet. There's plenty I don't know, and I'll admit it. But denying an effect because you don't think that you think that you're being lied to, no, that doesn't make sense. But since they want to deny gravity and there's not much you can do to prove it, they'll try to provide evidence that gravity does not exist. A lot of the main examples they use are just objects that fly, helicopters, planes, birds, insects. What they do is they create a pressure differential in the air that essentially pushes them up, and that's what allows them to maintain their altitude. But kill a bird or an insect, then it drops. Kill the engine on a plane or a helicopter, it drops. And that kind of means that they are being pulled on by gravity. They're just showing resistance. I mean, take a rubber band. If you stretch it, you can hold your arms there for a while. Does that mean that the rubber band isn't pulling it together? I mean, let's see. Take, for instance, this bungee. do this, it's pulling on my arms, even though I can hold it for a while. I'm resisting the pull of the bungee itself. As soon as I stop, the bungee will pull my arms together. So, when I was holding the bungee, did it stop pulling on me? Or was it pulling on me the whole time and I was just able to resist it? That's the whole concept of flight and gravity. Planes, birds, insects, helicopters, they resist gravity, but gravity still pulls on them even when they are flying. So, that right there is a dumb way to try to disprove gravity. Now, another thing they talk about are helium balloons and boats on water, which rely on buoyancy. It's funny, without the water, boats don't exactly float in air. They kind of just stay on the land. And if you fill a boat with water, they tend to sink. Yeah. So it's almost like they're using the pressure differential between, well, for boats, air and water to stay afloat, and helium balloons use pressure differential between helium and the air around us to stay afloat. Because you remove the helium from the balloon, and the balloon falls, and if you put a helium balloon into a vacuum chamber, the balloon falls with the helium in it, kind of indicating that it's being pushed by the air. So that really doesn't work. Now, here's a... Now, backtracking a bit, here's a funny thing about electromagnetism. Even if you replace gravity with electromagnetism, logically speaking, it doesn't solve the issue whatsoever. Magnetic fields are three-dimensional, meaning that a magnetic field is going to pull things from all directions. So, again, that means that it would create a sphere, not a plane. So that right there, even though it wouldn't, that kind of debunks the concept that electromagnetism explains the flat Earth. Truth is, it doesn't. That it doesn't explain the flat Earth in any way, shape, or form. Now, I think the reason why they try using electromagnetism, and no, not all, because I don't know how many different explanations try to use, but I think the reason why they try to use it is because electromagnetism, even on a plane, would have an even pull on everything, where gravity wouldn't. But that it doesn't actually help them whatsoever. Now, one of the funny things I like to do is they take a clip of Neil deGrasse Tyson where he's talking with someone about how the dimensions of the Earth aren't, from our point of view, aren't perfectly distributed. But when you take a look at what they're describing, it's really not that... when he's trying to uses a pear shape, he's not saying that it's actually a pear, but a pear is it's an object that we're well aware of, where the bottom is thicker than the top. It's a common thing that everyone knows, so that's why he's describing it. But he also said that it was just a little bit chubbier at the bottom than the top. Well, when you get to bigger and bigger objects, we're going to be able to notice things that at the surface that you wouldn't be able to notice far away. I mean, take for instance, you have a toy ball on the top hemisphere. It's 4.6 centimeters, and at the bottom it's 4.5. Are you really going to notice that millimeter in difference? No, because unless you decide to really measure it with precision, but we're not going to notice that small of a difference. So when you look at pictures of the Earth, that's kind of what we're looking at. The percentages are so minute that we're not going to see it from pictures of space. And as far as pictures from space, well, generally most of the pictures aren't trying to necessarily get a picture of the Earth as a single point. They're trying to get a picture of like the land masses and the oceans. Well, in that case, they typically don't want clouds. So doing a composite makes sense. And as far as composites go, most phones have a feature called a panoramic picture, where it actually stitches 3 pictures together to give you a bigger picture. That's what compositing is. That's it. That is a composite. There are different ways to do compositing, but that's a type that NASA is using. They're using that kind of compositing. So if you're going to say that the blue marble picture is fake because it's composited and that it's inaccurate, well then all the panoramic pictures that you take with your phone, those are completely fake as well. There is no way that you could have gotten 3 pictures to line up like that. So, yeah, that's literally how silly that argument is. And on top of that, there's actually more evidence for the globe Earth besides that. But one of the funny things that people like to talk about are how the artificial horizon, which uses a gyroscope to keep planes on their vector, how if the Earth were round, it should be spinning all over. Not necessarily. I mean, it also uses a weight to make sure that the it uses a weight to make sure that it doesn't do that. So gravity keeps pulling on it properly. And I found that out with the Armored Skeptic when he actually admitted that he was wrong about gyroscopes. He did this video where he talked about things that he got wrong, and the artificial horizon using a gyroscope. He found out why they don't just go completely upside down when planes move. And he actually admitted that gyroscopes do try to stay in place. Now, another video I saw, this is a flat earth video where a guy was trying to claim that the pendulum test, the famous pendulum test where you have a freestanding pendulum and it will change direction over time as long as it keeps swinging. Well, that uses a gyroscopic motion to keep it in place. So, if gyroscopes try to resist where they're at, so do pendulums, because essentially it's just a gyroscopic motion that it uses. So, that right there kind of shows how contradictory flat earthers can be about their concepts. Like, gyroscopic motion proves the flat earth until it doesn't. No. Well, I'm kind of running out of ideas to talk about on this subject. But if you want to try to prove that the Earth is flat, well, you also have to try to prove that space doesn't exist. Or you have to prove that there's something beyond Antarctica. Which, if you want to try to risk the cold of Antarctica to prove that, go ahead. Be my guest. Now, to be honest, not all flat earthers believe that Antarctica is the ice wall. Some actually think it's the North Pole. Not kidding about that one either. There are a few out there that do believe that it's the North Pole. Now, if you're wondering why I'm not giving references, it's because this isn't a video whether or not I'm trying to actually debunk it. I'm just conveying my own thoughts. If I do decide to actually make a video to debunk the flat earth, then yes, I'll provide references, but this isn't it. And what's really hilarious is that this doesn't need to be debunked. Well, for the most part. We've already proven, this nation's already proven that it's willing to elect a reality TV star as president. That is the most success he's ever had. So, I could potentially see someone like BOP or some of those and NBA flat earthers getting elected president. And you've got someone who doesn't believe that NASA is doing the job they're claiming, being in charge of the executive branch, which they're kind of in charge of the checkbook of the country. One of those were to get in charge of our checkbook, then there's a good chance that they could actually defund some very important programs that we use. I mean, one of the reasons why we actually have smartphones and computers and whatnot is because of the fact that we needed equipment that would be effective as the computers they were using in Houston that weighed a lot less. And I know a lot of them try to say that the moon landing was faked, and they tried using the Van Allen radiation belts. Well, we already knew that radiation existed, so why wouldn't they take that precaution? Because we had no idea what was going to be on the moon. It could have been far more radioactive than what most people think the Van Allen belts are. So, more likely, they would have provided some protection for radiation. So, that right there just doesn't. Using the Van Allen belts to disprove the moon landing doesn't work. Oh yeah, and the ISS. They try claiming that the ISS is fake. Claiming that it's filmed underwater, you might be able to get away with that on the outside, but not on the inside, because they have to be able to be on the... They would actually have to be able to breathe. Yeah, that's the crazy thing. They'd actually have to be able to breathe water in order for them to fake it in a swimming tank. And somehow magically stay dry. Now, they also try to claim that's on a plane that does parabolic maneuvers. Well, the only problem is that those kind of maneuvers can only be done for a brief period of time. And since there are videos of astronauts floating around for 30 minutes at a time, unedited, and they even do live streams where 30 minutes at a time they're floating around. That's well beyond any plane's ability to do a parabolic maneuver. Not to mention, that must be the biggest plane on Earth, because they're able to go for quite a while. They're able to actually go up, down, forwards, backwards, all sorts of directions, because the International Space Station isn't... Yeah, it's huge. So, yeah, I don't... There may be, but I can't think of any plane that would be that large. That's just ridiculous. And there's ones... Sometimes they'll say, oh, well, they're just wearing harnesses. Okay, I've seen one clip where, yes, the astronaut is probably wearing a harness when they're on the outside of the space station. I kind of hope they're wearing a harness. Because I don't want them flying out in space and getting lost, and oh, that'd just be awful. So that is the one clip where I would see that the astronauts wearing a harness. Any footage where they're on the outside of the space station, yes, they're going to be wearing a harness. Because it keeps them tethered. But they're not wearing a harness that holds them up. They don't need that. And as far as like the moon landing being faked, well, there's this one person tried claiming that the suit was being hoisted with a harness. Except for if you actually study harness suits rather than a jump, when an astronaut jumps, or when a person jumps in a suit, the way the armor moves indicates that it's being pushed up. Where if you take someone who's being lifted by a harness, the way it moves actually does indicate that it's being lifted. So, no, that the moonshots actually indicate that the suits are being pushed up. I mean, it's subtle, but if you know what you're looking for, you can tell. Well, I think that's pretty much it. I don't have too much to say. Peace.